Kids, here we are back for another part of the lottery. Just to review kind of where we were, we're circling those words like we keep seeing black and coal. We have been writing out in the margins kind of what each paragraph, what's going on. We know that the black box is important enough for the lottery every year, but it's not necessarily important enough for them to want to make a new one. And so you're kind of wondering, like, why don't they want to make a new one? Is it something going on? I don't know. So we're going to continue with this process. And here we go. Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, held the black box securely. There it is again. I'm going to circle that. So remember, I'm circling black every time I see it, or anything kind of dark like that. So Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual, okay, I like that. So it means they do it all the time if it's a ritual, had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood. That means they've probably done this for a while, if that's what they were using, or I wonder why they don't have paper easily accessible. Chips of wood, Mr. Summer had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. 300, that's not very big. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them in the box, and it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square the next morning. Mr. Summers must kind of be in charge of these things. So. The rest of the year, the box was put away, sometimes in one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves's barn and another year underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was set aside on a shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. So it can't be that special all the time if they're willing to put this box just, maybe on a shelf here or in someone's barn. So, I'm trying to figure out why this box is only important right now. So I'm going to write over here, they used to use paper, no longer wood chips. And I'm going to put box stored wherever, because I think it's important to know that it's stored just wherever they feel like it, because I feel like that maybe shows a connection with the box and the town and their feelings of the box, and maybe it's not good. I don't know. So here we go. There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered there had been a recital of some sort performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory, that's a tough word, even adult, a tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Some people believed that the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he said or sang it, and others believed that he was supposed to walk among the people, but years and years ago, this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. Well, there's that word. Remember up here, I had underlined the fact that much of the ritual, and now I'm going to connect these here because it is a ritual, it seems like, to a certain extent, but the fact that they're it used to be a chant and there used to be a swearing in and there used to be what part of this process is still important, There had been also a ritual salute. Look, there it is again. My goodness. There had been also a ritual salute which the official of the lottery had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box, but this also had changed with time. Until now, it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. Mr. Summers was very good at all of this, in his clean white shirt and blue jeans with one hand resting carelessly on the black box. He seemed very proper and important as he talked interminably, I hate saying that word, to Mr. Graves and the Martins. You know, Mr. Summers, like the way that the author has him dressed, look at Mr. Summers is in a clean white shirt and blue jeans. And so maybe it's, it sounds like we're kind of in a farming at the beginning. The men were talking about plows, and here's Mr. Summers in his white shirt and clean. And so it kind of reminds me of the season of summer in and of that too. So now this paragraph, it's talking about how there used to be like, I don't know, it sounds like it used to be really important, but like maybe now it's not as important as it once was. So I'm gonna put like used to be big ritual. I'm gonna go ahead and use the word that they use because I think it's to describe what's happening. So it used to be a big ritual, but now it's just more like I don't know the right words, but like it's a checked off event. Like it used to be a ritual. Rituals tend to be important. Rituals tend to be things that people want to be a part of and continue. And now it doesn't seem like it's a ritual anymore if all the stuff they used to do as a ritual has just been like checked off the list. And so I'm going to use the term checked off. If you have a different way to do it, of course, use that. So let's continue. Just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking and turned to the assembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders and slid into place in the back of the crowd. Colleen forgot what day it is, she said to Mrs. Delacroix, who stood next to her, and they both laughed softly. Thought my old man was out back stacking wood, Miss Hutchinson went on, and then I looked out the window and the kids was gone, and then I remembered it was the 27th and came a-running. She dried her hands on her apron, and Mrs. Delacroix said, "You're in time, though. They're still talking away up there." Well, her kind of attitude, Mrs. Hutchinson's, like, maybe it's not something that's, it's an exciting thing because, like, she doesn't seem like it's a big deal. Like, she clean forgot what day it is, and then they're laughing softly, and, then I remembered that and I just came a-running. So I feel like her demeanor right now is very like, oh, here we go. I totally forgot. I can't believe that. And so I wonder how that's all going to play out. So I'm just going to put she's late. So Mrs. H is late. And she's just like, I don't know. What can we put there? She's, I don't know if I know the right word right now, but she's okay with the fact that she's late. No big deal, maybe. All right. You ready? Remember to pause at any time if you need to, kiddos. Okay, so let's continue here. Mrs. Hutchinson craned her neck to see through the crowd and found her husband and children standing near the front. She tapped Mrs. Delacroix on the arm as a farewell and began to make her way through the crowd. The people separated good-humoredly to let her through. 2 or 3 of the people said in voices just loud enough to be heard across the crowd, "Here comes your Mrs. Hutchinson," and Bill, she made it after all. Mrs. Hutchinson reached her husband, and Mr. Summers, who had been waiting, said cheerfully, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie." Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, "Wouldn't have me leaving my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe?" And soft laughter ran through the crowd as the people stirred back into position after Mrs. Hutchinson's arrival. So it doesn't really seem like anyone's super concerned that she's late. Like, she's laughing, it's good humored. They're joking about the dishes. They're kind of joking about Mrs. H being late. Kind of how I'm taking this one. It's no big deal. Dishes are in the sink. It's Mr. Summers who's the one greeting her. They're calling her Tessie, so they probably know her fairly well. And she, because when you're using someone's first name, and okay, let's continue here. "Well, now," Mr. Summers said soberly. Now, this sober doesn't have anything to do with alcohol. This sober is like kind of like a sad, like you're not excited about what you're doing. So I'm wondering why we're going from this good-natured, like we're going from a happy exchange, like talking, they had a quick conversation, and then they're going into a sober conversation, because that's kind of that juxtaposition as well. Like, why did his demeanor change so quickly? Maybe this isn't going to be as great. Let's see. So I'm going to circle that word soberly. And remember, it has to do with his tone. It's very like, you might use a sober tone when you're talking about something serious. Well, now, Mr. Summers said soberly, guess better get started, get this over with so we can get back to work. Anybody in here? Dunbar, several people said. Dunbar, Dunbar. Mr. Summers consulted his list. Clyde Dunbar, he said. That's right. He broke his leg, didn't he? Hasn't he? Who's drawn for him? Me, I guess, a woman said, and Mr. Summers turned to look at her. Wife draws for her husband, Mr. Summers said. Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie? Ooh, got to have the men draw and the grown boys doing it for the girls so that the girls don't draw. They're not allowed to. So, So what kind of society is this that the woman can't draw? It has to be the man of the house or the grown boy of the house instead of the mom. So that makes me wonder just why only men draw. Okay, that's my question right now. Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. They knew perfectly well. They knew the answer. I wonder why they know an answer to that question. Like, I don't know. Maybe she just doesn't have a son. Mr. Summers waited with an expression of polite interest while Mrs. Dunbar answered. Horace is not but 16 yet, Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. Guess I got to fill in for the old man this year. Right, Mr. Summers said. He made a note on the list he was holding, and then he asked, Watson boy drawing this year? The tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. Here, he said, I'm drawing for my mother and me. He blinked his eyes nervously and ducked his head as several voices in the crowd said things like, good fellow, lad, and glad to see your mother's got a man to do it. Ooh, got a man to do that. Ladies. Well, Mr. Summers said, guess that's everyone. Old man Warner make it? Here, said a voice, and Mr. Summers nodded. Old man Warner. I wonder why he's called old man. I wonder how old is he, you know? A sudden hush fell over the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat and looked at the list. All ready? He called. Now, I'll read the names, heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear? So basically, like, they're going to call the man or the dad of the family. He's going to come up and take a slip of paper, and then he's going to go stand with his family. And then the man of the next family is going to come draw a slip of paper, and every man's going to be holding a piece of paper at the end of all of this. So the people had done it so many times, they only half listened to the directions. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. Why wouldn't they be looking around? Maybe like staring straight ahead. Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, Adams. The man disengaged himself from the crowd and came forward. Hi, Steve, Mr. Summers said, and Mr. Adams said, Hi, Joe. And they grinned at one another humorlessly and nervously. So without humor, so things are funny and they're nervous, like, what's going on? Why? Then Mr. Adams reached into the black box and took out a folded paper. He held it firmly by one corner as he turned and went hastily back to his place in the crowd, where he stood a little apart from his family, not looking down at his hand. So I'm wondering why he doesn't want to look at what's in his hand. He hastily went back to his place in the crowd. So that hastiness, like he's in a hurry to get off the stage. Remember earlier they were nervous around the box. So what's going to happen next is I'm not going to continue to read this on here, but there's going to be a recording of it that will just play the rest of the story for you. And so what you're going to do is listen, mark the text as you go, do some annotations, continue to look for those words like black, or if something else is going on, or if you notice a juxtapositioning of two things going against each other, which the day as a whole is going to be a juxtaposition. So there's a bit of news for you to think about as you go. So, all right, enjoy. Oh, and think about what modern day story this is maybe reminding you of. That could be important.